I'm Gary Venner, CEO of IFA Acquisitions, and I'm joined by Gemma Irvine, who's the HR lead and director of HR People Support, who run trusted outsourced HR partner support, where we continue our informative question and answer series on our YouTube channel to provide insights into helping buyers and sellers understand the benefits of using HR specialists for the buying and selling of IFA businesses for sound HR advice. The title of the next video is coming up on the screen now. One of the things we find is that buyers, there is a concern that staff, if they leave, particularly advisors that have built relationships with clients, and if the contract, either there is no contract or there is a contract but it has no non-compete clauses, that they are unhappy with that because, an advisor moves and very difficult sometimes to prove solicitation of clients. So what would your advice be to somebody that would really like those non-compete clauses put into contracts? How would you say that should be organised?
I'm going to come back to the kind of what you need to do is consult properly and put in place something that is adequate and seek their agreement to move on to those kind of new terms effectively. The difficulty is when you're trying to effect new terms, it's a change of terms and conditions.
Sure.
And potentially that's directly linked to the transfer, which could be void. So it's really challenging to kind of, in that specific situation where there are no protection clauses in place and you need to protect the business and the clients as you transfer. You need to kind of make sure that you're consulting properly. I mean, in that specific situation, you might need to consult if they don't agree and they don't want to kind of move over to new terms and conditions. You might have to rely on kind of regulatory arguments in terms of kind of FCA guidance, that kind of thing, because the tribunal is going to look at what you've done as reasonably possible to ensure that you're transferring fairly.
Yeah.
So you might need legal advice around that, you might need specific advice, but effectively if they refuse to transfer, they're effectively resigning from the position. So you might get into a situation where they say, no, I don't have a contract in place, but I'm refusing to sign that contract. You might need to go through a negotiation process to be able to kind of understand what the barriers are. But if there's a refusal, they are resigning from their post and they leave. There is another option where there might be a refusal where you effectively dismiss and re-engage on new terms. There's a lot of complexity around that in terms
Sure.
of the consultation, the timings, when that needs to happen, and the legalities behind it, but that's the consideration that you would be looking at.
And I suppose if you're looking to dismiss and then rehire, then potentially that individual is entitled to redundancy and for however many years that they've accrued, etc.
Yeah, it's very difficult because it will depend on whether it's a true redundancy.
Of course.
You need to look at kind of all the ins and outs around that.
Yeah, because then there are laws that say you can't rehire and etc.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's a complex area.
It's very complex.
And really is important that you take expert advice here, and I guess even when somebody resigns, don't rely on that, because it could be deemed later on that was constructive dismissal in any case, I guess.
Yes, there's so much complexity around it, and it really depends on the individual circumstance of the individual contracts, the individual employers, the individual transfer, and how it's been handled, and the reasoning behind it. But you would need to ensure that you've got proper advice behind you.
Sure. And TUPE is all about the undertakings, and it is for the protection of staff, isn't it? And that's a good thing. You know, we can't deny that that is good. That's what should be in place. But some employees from the firm that's being sold might have different contracts to the acquiring business. Am I right in thinking here that, you know, that member of staff can't lose any of the special terms and conditions that they have, but the new acquirer doesn't give that to its own staff? They can't lose that, is that right?
Correct, that's all protected.
Oh, so what happens if that they're moving to a new company and they seem to have better contracts? Can they expect as a right that they will move over to the better terms?
So TUPE is to protect their previous terms and conditions.
Right.
So they move into an acquiring firm, and there may be differences in terms and conditions around that. Their terms and conditions are protected. You might be in a position during the consultation process to kind of unpick kind of whether there are clear differentials between terms and conditions. The new employer might have 35 days holiday, and the kind of the previous employer might have had statutory holiday.
Yeah.
So there are going to be differences, but what TUPE protects is your previous terms and conditions. You might be able to leverage some of that in terms of, well, you could have this additional benefit or this additional holiday if you come onto our contract,
Right.
which has more protective clauses in place.
So it could be used as a bargaining tool, really.
So you could leverage that.
Yeah.
You also could kind of look at the kind of the business as a whole, kind of 6 months, 9 months down the line, and say, okay, actually, we're going to kind of offer everybody a completely new benefit, so everybody gets access to it. It's really kind of about protecting those previous terms for those individuals that have transferred, so they are at no detriment because of the transfer. But yes, there may be inconsistencies across terms and conditions.
Gemma, we have a number of acquirers that are on buy and build programs to grow to become, you know, big national IFAs, and of course carrying out a number of acquisitions ends up having this myriad of different employment contracts. What advice would you give to somebody that is on a buy and build to sort of standardise the contracts?
It's a tricky one, because naturally you are going to have a number of different terms and conditions that you have to manage. I mean, I would say if you have enhanced and better terms and conditions, then you can.
It's an ideal time.
You can bring them across. You have to have that agreement, and they have to not lose any of their original terms.
Yeah.
Really harmonising terms and conditions is difficult, and not something that you can do, because at any point in the future, if a change in terms and conditions can be directly linked to the transfer, then it's void. So it's a really tricky area, but as incoming employees kind of get to know the culture of a new firm, and they settle in and they engage with the culture, and they see kind of the different benefits that other employees, existing employees, might have access to, they might be more inclined in the future to agree to transfer over onto new terms.
Sure. And one last thing, is you mentioned ELI. What does ELI stand for?
ELI is Employee Liability Information, and that's an obligation under TUPE that the outgoing employer must provide to the incoming employer, and that's from a protective measure, because the incoming employer is going to be taking on all of the liability of those employees. So they really need to be kind of aware of what they're taking on in terms of the liability, and that ELI information includes kind of individual details, dates of birth, length of service, sick days, annual leave days, any kind of discrimination claims, any grievance claims, anything that kind of might potentially be contentious in the future because they're taking on that liability. So from an outgoing employer's perspective, it's really important that you are able to provide that ELI and that you have the means and mechanisms to be able to collate that data and transfer it securely as part of that process. There's a time limit for ELI. You have to provide to the incoming employer 28 days before the relevant transfer date takes place.
Okay, it's good to know. Thank you. And what advice would you give to acquirers that are looking at acquiring businesses with staff, and what sort of processes should they be looking at when they are doing their HR due diligence?
I think as an acquiring firm, you want to be looking at the people right from the start and considering them from the beginning. That's really important. So when you're first discussing those, it's really important that you've got the information around the employees. What you want to be doing is looking at the contracts, the restrictive covenants, the liabilities that you're taking on. Again, that if you do that right from the start, it saves a lot of time later on. So the robust due diligence process is making sure that you have access to all that information, and the outgoing employer is able to provide that information. I've seen so many processes where you get towards the end of near the transfer date and they still haven't provided kind of holiday information, like how can we transfer without this information? Because actually it's really important for individuals concerned that they know, you know, how much holiday they've got, how much holiday they've taken. It's all the detail that will smooth the process for the future. So for acquiring businesses, it's about looking at policies, looking at contracts, making sure you've got all the information you need up front to be able to make an informed decision going forward. And then it's placing those people at the forefront of that process.
Yeah, Gemma, I totally agree that, you know, it really is an important aspect to look at the HR side of things, and particularly with IFA acquisitions, because number one priority always seems to be the due diligence on past advice to clients and for their investments, and then the next big one is the validation of the recurring income data. And if we're not careful, the HR side of the people processes can take a sort of a back step, really. So I think listening to you today, it's been really good to know that this is vitally important and should be up there with all those other important due diligence requirements.
Absolutely, and I think from my point of view, it's really important not to forget the people aspect, because there are time frames that we have to adhere to, and more often you see processes that are coming up to a transfer date and they then realise they then need to inform and consult the staff, and then the transfer date is next week and wonder why somebody's saying it's probably too short notice now, we can't do it in a week. So it's really important to build those obligations in.
And the good thing about it is vendors, you know, when we talk about their needs, the staff is always up there. You know, it's they want to make sure the staff are well looked after. Yeah. So it clearly is just a reminder of meeting those goals.
Absolutely, and it's so important for that ongoing relationship based on trust, and it's vital that through this consultation process, through the transfer process, you're doing all you can as an incoming employer to demonstrate that level of trust and that relationship going forward, because that will provide you with a fantastic baseline for a successful outcome on the other side.